WWT presents Experts.
Hello everyone, it's Matthew Coble, host of WWT Experts, and today I'm delighted to introduce two experts from Worldwide Technology in this episode of our four-part series on global financial services and how the industry is affected by topics like artificial intelligence, security, tech debt, and today's topic, data. We've got two guests, the first of whom is David Reilly, and prior to joining us at WWT, David spent 10 years as CTO and later CIO of Bank of America. David's always sought to drive business results via digital transformation, and he really loves the way that adopting technologies can be both a positive force for the business, but also good for the culture of organizations as well. In addition to his current role at Worldwide Technology, David is an active board member of several organizations, both commercial and nonprofit, and he blends his passion for technology with a strong sense of human purpose. Also joining us is Hau Tran, who is a practice lead for data strategy and data security with Worldwide Technology. And prior to joining us in 2022, he worked at companies like Palo Alto, VMware, and Dell, and altogether has over 25 years of experience in the technology world. Throughout his career, he's focused on data, all things data. You got strategy, you got governance, security, compliance, lifecycle management, or as he likes to say, data to the nth. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for coming and joining us today.
Thank you, Matt. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah.
Likewise. Thank you, Matt.
Well, let's jump right in. So, data clearly is key to everything that financial institutions do, and all the more important now with the rise of AI, right? So how are organizations thinking about data today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Data is the epicenter of how companies operate, right? Small, medium, large, it really doesn't matter. And so data is key. And so from a artificial intelligence perspective, it allows them to really reinvent themselves to be able to innovate, right? And not only be faster at what they do, but be better at what they do. And some of that betterness comes around the idea that it's more applicable, it's more targeted. When you look at like the retail space, it certainly makes sense that I could better service my customer better. I could better manage my customers. I can better retain my customers, offer better services and products that meet their specific needs. Especially when it comes down to the fact that I've already have some information about that particular individual or, their demographic information, things like that. So when I could use all that information and use the power of AI to put all this information and collect it and put it to my use, I can better service those individuals. From a package and a product perspective, it certainly has its importance, right? Over the course of the last, several decades, collecting all this information and putting it together in a way that makes it a little bit more consumable to allow me as an organization, a financial services organization, to effectively better build my business, my practices, and creating offerings and services to grow the business in a much more expedient way. It allows me to beat my competitors out. So that's kind of my take on it.
Mm-hmm. I think, as Hal points out, Matt, it's the fuel for the business in financial services. How do you better understand what your clients need? How do you better serve them? How do you get to the ultimate point of a customer segment of one? That is all about the insights you can draw from the data that you have about your customers, what your customers are going to need to do. And then as an IT practitioner, Matt, ensuring that as that data travels across your company, from front to middle to back office, through all the control functions, that you're protecting that data, storing it and backing it up and ensuring that it is accurate and complete to ultimately ensure you're delivering the best services to your clients.
Yeah. A lot of organizations out there are working to mature their data so it's designed to deliver great outcomes for artificial intelligence that we're all talking about these days. Does that work fall mostly on IT or on the business or both?
I think that's a great question, Matt. I think we're still rounding the corner where in most organizations it's a mixed bag. The data repository is often where the responsibility sits inside an organization to ensure that the right people can access the right data at the right time, when the only place really that problem should reside is with the business. IT, I think, can help ensure that those repositories are properly secured, that the access to the data is properly managed, and that it is properly governed. But ultimately, like every other key business asset, capital, the customer relationship, the intellectual property that ensures that the business can bring ideas to their clients, the data has to be similarly owned by the business. And if you can round that corner and ensure that the business takes first-person ownership of the data, and us practitioners in IT allow that to happen, then I think you can really start to accelerate the opportunities you have inside of AI and outside of AI to make use of that data to ultimately get to that customer segment of one.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. You know, IT and the business have to be in lockstep with each other. And I won't go into the details of why that isn't sometimes, but you know, from an IT perspective, the storage and the management and the security of that information, the access of that information is incredibly important, not discounting whatsoever, but equally important is the business are the ones that own the data. Right? They curate and they manage and create the data, and they have to life cycle that data from the quality of that data. What's the intent and the purpose of that data? They're the ones that manage it, right? Because every time you create data, there's got to be the opposite end of that. Who's going to consume it? When are they going to consume it? How are they going to consume it? And so they need to be good stewards of that information going forward through the entirety of its life cycle. And so they have to partner with IT to effectively help them get that data into the right hands, right, in a secure fashion.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I think about financial institutions, gents, I'm thinking about there's just vast amounts of data out there, right? And so I got to imagine that there's some use cases with that data are actually good starting points, and others that may not be so good. So what's your take on that, and what advice do you give to our clients?
I think a great place to start, Matt, is to find the places inside your company where there are manual processes involved to leverage the data that you have. Oftentimes, in financial institutions, where the data is born, whether that's, let's say, a mortgage or a trade or a credit decision, in the front office, that decision gets made, and then that loan or that trade is booked, and then that trade or loan flows downstream, typically to finance and risk, where over the life of that trade or that mortgage, those groups are responsible for ensuring that they're assessing the risk associated with what happens to that piece of commerce over its entire life. Oftentimes what you find, Matt, is that there are processes inside an enterprise, sometimes called things like data enrichment. Sounds great. What it actually is a group that gets information downstream from the front office, but that information doesn't have all the data that they need to manage that piece of commerce over its entire life cycle. So what happens? Sometimes it gets duplicated, and then the copy has different elements of data added to it, or manual processes add to it at the source. Both are bad, because what we're not doing is fixing the problem at the source, which is how could we change the business process to ensure that when that piece of commerce is born, when it's created, it has all the elements of data it needs for the entire life cycle throughout your enterprise. If as an IT practitioner, Matt, you can find those spots, you're finding areas of inefficiency, areas of inaccuracy, where I think you can create partnership inside the business and inside risk and audit to correct those missing pieces of data at source, which ensure more accuracy, more correctness, ultimately better service to your clients, and your enterprise operating expenses will be lower.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great, David. There's several ways you can describe data, and what comes to my mind is the completeness of data. And I look at it from the lens of, in the absence of all the data, what do I do, right? What does a human do? Right, they start to fill in those gaps with other sources of data that may not be accurate, they start making assumptions, right? And so when you start filling in those gaps with those assumptions or inaccurate data, then the byproduct or the end product of that is an inconclusive statement or a statement that's just not accurate. And then when you look at data accuracy itself, right, a lot of organizations have to think about it from a lens of, is this the best statement, semantically correct way of stating what we want to message, right? If it's a service or a product or a message to my consumers, whatever it may be, I want to make sure that whatever I'm delivering meets our corporate guidelines, right? It meets our guidance and how we present ourselves to our customers or our partners. or any entity that we do business with. And so that becomes very, very important that we have data governance to give us that guiding light on how we address everything around our data.
All right, so I know a question we may have out there is thinking about technology leaders and what they should consider when defining the target state of their data.
Yeah, so from that regard, I will probably think about it. I think about it from these perspectives. Is the business are the ones that are the drivers around data and the information, right? What do they want to use with that data? What do they want to achieve with that data? What's their ultimate goal and their objectives with that data, right? And then go about creating that data and designing that data. And then more importantly, when I create data, who is my target audience, right? Who am I creating this for? That's probably one of the most important components. And then from an IT perspective, they're the ones that are in charge of getting that data into the right hands in an authorized, secure fashion, right? So creating the conduits, what I call the highways to the data, and then the windows of access into the data, and then representing that data in a fashion that humans can understand and interpret. And that's exactly what an application does. And part of IT is securing that application to make sure that there is no unauthorized access, and allowing myself as an organization and my business partners to go faster, be more productive with that information that's been targeted and created and curated by the business.
I think sometimes when you think about those target states, as Hau's articulated in IT, you often start to think about, well, what does my application footprint look like today? And I've got, let's use the financial services example, Matt. I've got a payment system, I've got a credit decisioning system, I've got a lending system, I've got an institutional banking system, and I've got customer information across all those. And you think about target states around those systems. And that often isn't how the business will think about the data that lives in those systems. The business may say, I want to understand everything I'm doing with my client, Ford. But if you look inside those four systems, unless you're hubbed around the client information, which is ultimately what the business wants, Ford EV, Ford US, Ford Motor Company, Ford Europe, to IT systems, that looks like 5 different customers. But to the business, they want one view. So what's important is understanding with your business partner, what are the most important ways for you to leverage this data? And if it is, I want to leverage the customer, in this case Ford, across all the things they do with our institution. Beginning then with your application footprint would be the wrong place to start. A tempting place to start, but it won't ultimately fix the underlying problem. And sometimes as practitioners, we have to take that step back and say, well, in that case, we need to architect something that's built around one way to view a client who may have multiple subsidiaries, redesign that, because ultimately that half a step backwards, Matt, is going to let you go much, much faster and ultimately allow the business to serve that customer or any of its customers in a much more comprehensive manner. Mm-hmm.
Well, I imagine that there's a lot of tension there for organizations out there, because on the one side, I've got the business who wants data for insights, customer knowledge, and those sort of business function, and we have IT or technology leaders who want security, storage, backup, access to data. And so those are kind of competing visions of the data structure. Meanwhile, we've also got to run the day-to-day operations of the business, right? So how do you reconcile those tensions between vision for data strategy and structure with operations and really advance moving forward with the long-term data goals that you have in an organization?
Yeah, I don't think there's a single answer, Matt. I think it's very situational. So if, let's say, we've decided that we want to hub our data around the client identifier so that we can get a holistic view of everything we do with that customer, there will be times when, because of operational needs, you've got to do a piece of work that isn't getting you closer to that end state. And there'll be other times when, let's say you've got a live example that I was familiar with, a general ledger migration, a very difficult program to execute. I was fortunate to have a fantastic partner in the finance group when I executed that program with the team, where he was keen to ensure that we fixed as many problems as we could at source. And so we leveraged that program. It took a little bit longer than would have otherwise been the case, but ultimately we fixed a lot of underlying foundational issues, many of them in the data space because that was a one-time opportunity where we were going to crack open that application code and we had an opportunity to re-architect. Super transparent that it would take a bit longer, but ultimately the rewards were there. I think as practitioners, it's on us to say, hey, listen, we're opening up this code base. Is now a time for us to get a little closer to our target state? Or given the pace we need to move at, now is not the time. Intent, Matt, I think is the key. Don't surprise the business and do it without them knowing, but don't not share that this could be one of those moments where we could get closer to target state. I think how it comes back to that partnership between IT and the business to make those decisions with intent.
Yeah, I look at it from the lens of velocity, data velocity. Who needs it? When do they need it? Where do they need it, right? And when this global workforce changes, and evolved over the last 20, 30 years, footprints of offices and data centers and cloud adoption, end users work from anywhere they want to, post-pandemic state, it has changed the way our data landscape is. Now I got to deliver it to different locations. So you can look at it from a FedEx or a UPS analogy. I got to start delivering these packages being the data, to all different parts of the world in a secure fashion, right? I give a package to the UPS driver. I know that it's secure. I know that it's trustworthy, and so on and so forth. So IT has to be able to create that conduit in which they could facilitate that data movement and the velocity of that data movement. Do I need to build a bigger highway? Do I need to build a bigger truck to carry that data payload? And when I get it to that recipient, they got to sign for that, right? And so hopefully that analogy worked, but it all depends, on what the data is, and again, who's accessing it, where they're accessing it, from where they're accessing it, because equally important is making sure that I secure that data from an authorized perspective to make sure that it doesn't get in the wrong hands. And a lot of organizations talk about and security becomes very, very important, but you have to understand all the other components to be able to apply the correct security measures around that payload or that piece of data that you're trying to distribute.
This episode is brought to you by Red Hat, the world's leading provider of enterprise open source solutions, including high-performing Linux, cloud, container, and Kubernetes technologies.
Okay, so organizations out there are thinking about, data completeness, data correctness, accuracy, and those are kind of different versions of the same thing often, but there's a lot of tension on that right now because of this push with all things AI, right? So how do you balance completeness, correctness, accuracy with the strive to kind of get new AI things out there?
That's a great question, Matt. I get it all the time. I'm actually starting to see it all the time is to see an organization with this kind of the decision point or inflection moment where they want to stay abreast of what's happening in AI. It's this electrifying moment where a lot of companies are starting to gather a lot of momentum, building efficiencies, building a lot of productivities of what AI can provide. But they have some reservations around: are they prepared? Is their data complete? Right? And in absence of completeness, you have a lot of downstream effects, negative effects, where they start to fill in those gaps with some hypotheses. They start to fill in those gaps with some enrichment of data from unreliable data sources, to fill that void. And so when you start to inject some of those components that have not been verified or validated, and the integrity of it's been verified, you get the end result, which is not quality output or quality data on that output. And the other aspect is, how do I start a project or an initiative to start going through and cleansing all my data, right? That becomes a challenge. And so they fall in this kind of this middle ground where they seem to be can't make a decision, right? But at the same time, business is not going to slow down. Their competitors are not going to slow down. So they have to come to terms of when's a good point to say, hey, my data is complete enough. I can go ahead and take that next step, right? And apply my data to then start generating additional information, allow my company to be more productive.
And I think in the past, when we've had these cases where I need your data to do something, but your data isn't complete for everything I need, the output from that has often been, well, I'll just take a copy of Hau's data and then I'll add what I need added, and then I'm going to be good for what I need. And we've lived that way for a long time. And so you end up with more copies, slightly different, but fundamentally the same data across your enterprise. That drives up expenses, so it's always been a difficult thing to try and manage, and it increases risk, more things to protect. But in this new world, where I want to rely on this data for the entire enterprise, not just the local needs, I've now got a federal set of needs. That ability to stamp out copies that you would make a little bit more accurate, a little bit more fit for purpose, is actually going to slow down the adoption of the technologies Hau's talking about. Mm-hmm. So I think it forces us as practitioners to take a moment and say, is now the right time for me to take a copy of that data and use it for my own purposes? None of us have ever done that thinking that that was a bad idea, but I think the stakes are getting higher because the more of those copies that exist, the tougher it's going to be for your enterprise to leverage that data across the company for the good of the company when you start to deploy broader AI projects.
Yeah, just adding to what you said, David, making sure that I have 10 copies of the same statement, but slightly written different. What's the semantically correct way of stating that, right? And it becomes really imperative that I have a corporate message standard that I deliver that in, right? And because you know how that saying is, when I tell a story and that story, by the time it gets to the 10th person, it's metaphor to a completely different story, right, Matt?
Right.
And so that is what I'm talking about, the exponential change of that data, the more times it's replicated or duplicated or rewritten. And so it's very, very important that I can source the originality of that piece of information and then use that as my foundation to build upon as I move forward, using AI to then create generative AI type of models.
Yeah. Well, I imagine all this takes a lot of courageous leadership from the business and the technology leadership to make these things happen, which I think we're seeing more and more in the marketplace, right? Which is great. Well, I'm curious, how are we seeing clients have success when it comes to maturing data for kind of early AI initiatives? Are they doing that at scale? Is it small examples? What do you all see in the market?
At this stage, Matt, I think what I'm seeing is a tremendous amount of experimentation. And at the moment, limited numbers of use cases. One that I've seen or two that I'd cite that I think are incredibly effective productivity-wise, the contact center is a rich environment for the use of some of these technologies. The end of every call that the contact center takes, that call gets written up. After call summaries are created, typically manually. If you can teach the model, typically how you interact with your clients in a contact center, you can get summarized information on those calls that then that agent can read, make slight edits, move on to the next call. Yep. Great use of the technology. Less time typing, more time talking to your customers and delivering better service. And higher quality output for those call summaries. A very small, very targeted use case, but one I think that's going to allow you to grow to then, okay, with that insight, how can I provide better real-time assistance to that contact center agent the next time a problem like that comes in? Starts with summarization. So early, but I think very, very effective.
Yeah, a great example. What I like to use is with my clients is I like to tell them to start small, right? And you look at a big organization, a multi-global national organization, there's just petabytes and petabytes and petabytes of data servicing multiple business divisions. And using your example, David, of a customer service, right? Focusing on that, and looking at the different databases and repositories that stores a plethora of customer information. Maybe it's developing a simple prompt to how to allow my customer service representatives, for example, to better service their customers. We all love personability when, somebody says hello to me and says, "Hey, Mr. Tran, welcome. What can I do for you today?" And they understand, "Hey, how's your daughter doing? How's your son doing?" All these things. That's personable. And I tell you, that makes me feel great, right? When somebody that I don't know can actually reach out to me and understand what my needs are, and then go into how can I assist you by having that just a 30-second dialogue. And so imagine a customer service representative using that demographic information to understand me, to offer a better experience for me, right? I might be having a bad day. I might be, thinking about something else. But I promise you, if they can bring that element of personability to the conversation, they have my undivided attention. And so when we start organizations in the financial services to build a better customer service banking portal and a customer service prompt to allow them to reach out to their customers, customers better, that is a good thing for any organization to be able to accomplish. And if we can start there, we can move on to all these other divisions within the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we've been talking about data. We're talking about financial services. So I kind of feel like, David, we got to ask you about regulatory environments too, right? So as organizations are continuing to evolve, maturity of data, they're supporting AI initiatives, what do they need to be keeping in mind from a regulatory standpoint?
I think proving intent and that the way in which you've used that data, be it to train the model or to exercise the AI across, is done with intent. I think the first challenge will be to ensure that whatever governance processes that you have inside your institution, built in partnership with your second and third line, with risk, with compliance, with privacy, with audit, that you can prove that the control that's exercised over who gets to use that data, who gets to see that data, who gets to draw insights and draw conclusions and take actions with that data is done with absolute intent. You didn't reverse into something that then is not explainable. That may feel like a couple of more hurdles that are being put in the way of delivering business enablement, but in the long run, it's going to be absolutely crucial that we can prove that we've done these things with intent. We didn't over-grant access to the model to use more data than it should have done or the wrong data to train it. And then we didn't exercise the AI across data that we didn't have permissible permission to use it for. I would think about that in the same way as we think about traditional applications. We think long and hard as practitioners about who has access to what, be that a person or an application. The same rule set has to apply within AI. And I think, quite rightly, inside your corporation, that's what, as a practitioner, you should keep an eye on. It's what your risk and control partners will ask about. And of course, it's what the regulators will look to too. And of course, with some of for global companies, Matt, where you've got local country jurisdictional rules that you have to apply, data has to be stored and viewed from certain places and not from others. That's all about intent and appropriate use. If there was one thing to take away, Matt, it would be that you can prove in the future, looking back at what you did today, that you did so with intent. It wasn't accidental or it wasn't a second order consequence.
No. All right, last question for both of you. Many of our clients out there, financial services or otherwise, are on a data journey. So what are the 2 or 3 things that you speak to them about as the key measures of success?
Key measures of success is certainly understanding your data, understanding the recipient of that data. And so when that data and that information gets out to those recipients, there has to be a full circle check, right, to make sure that that information is being used in a fashion such that it meets your objectives, right? So, for example, if I had a marketing campaign and I'm targeting this specific demographic, right? What are the measures of measuring myself to make sure that I'm hitting the mark when I'm projecting that data out to that demographic that I'm targeting, whether it's a marketing campaign to gather, to gain more new customers or deliver a financial package like, that I want to test out in the market, right? So what type of feedback am I collecting to ensure that that's working for me? So that's kind of where I'd look at and start.
I agree, Hau. I think having a way to know and to measure that in this business process that we're executing every day, we found an instance where data was not accurate or it wasn't complete or it wasn't correct, get that recorded. A former colleague of mine put a process in place to allow us to do that, a trouble ticket, if you like, that shows you when I was executing this business process, I didn't have access to the information that I needed, or the access that I had wasn't everything that I needed. Measure that. because those are going to show you all the places where there's a break, where a business process couldn't be completed end to end without someone having to step in manually and correct or add or embellish or enrich some of that data. Tracking that inside your enterprise is going to give you a great set of views as to where do we have data challenges, which particular countries or departments or business processes that you can then show back to the business to say, if we fix these problems, here's the business opportunity that's ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. David, Hau, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us as well. Another great expert session. One of 4 in a series that we have around global financial services. So if you like this one, go check out the other 3 on artificial intelligence, security, and tech debt. And we've got a huge back catalog of shows you can watch at any time on WWT.com. Lots more coming up on the calendar. So mark your calendar, mark the date, and join us then or watch it in the future. And we always like to get some feedback from you. So take a moment to do the survey and the email and the invite, or just drop us an email directly and tell us how we did. That'll wrap our time for today. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.